You could spend years building up your stage presence, your timing, working on your charisma. You may already have done that. Today's guest is going to tell you that probably that's not what's going to get you booked or rebooked. Here's the problem. Plenty of speakers can walk off stage to great applause, great feedback forms, a standing ovation even, and never hear from that booking client again. And nobody who was there can even tell you what the talk was about. My guest today built an 11-year speaking career on the back of one viral TEDx talk, then watched it nearly collapse because charisma alone wasn't enough, and he's written a book about exactly why. Today we're talking about why design beats delivery, what the buzz is the business really means for getting booked again, and how to build real expertise without a single qualification to your name. It's very exciting for me to welcome to the Professional Speaking Show, Brian Miller.
John, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
I'm delighted that you agreed to my invite to come onto the show. And I heard you on my friend Bob Gentle's podcast, and I thought, oh, that's a very interesting conversation. And that made me straight away want to reach out to you and invite you to come on this show. One of the main reasons for that was you talking about the importance of, or the lack of importance of, the charisma for a keynote, and how really it's more about having the speech than anything else. And I thought, oh, this is somebody I need to have a conversation with. And I know that this is to do with your new book that's coming out, and we're going to get to all of that. But first of all, I have to ask you, as somebody who's been a professional magician, how did you end up making that journey to professional speaker?
Yeah, the journey from magician to speaker was mostly luck, which is a terrible answer because it's not useful essentially to anyone. I fell backwards into it. In 2015, I had been a full-time professional magician for the better part of a decade. And within the span of about 3 months, I got 2 speaking opportunities, and I had never pursued speaking, never wanted it. In fact, I had a very negative opinion of speakers. What I thought speakers were just Tony Robbins. And with due respect to Tony Robbins, it's just not my jam. I don't find it interesting or exciting. I find it just really a lot. And I often find that style of speaking a lot of nothing. And so it does a lot for a lot of people. It's not for me. So I thought that's what speaking is. And so when I got an offer though, one, I got invited by a local college prep high school. So it's a private high school designed exclusively for college prep. You would think all high schools are for college preparation, but this is like a dedicated college prep high school. And they were having their commencement in a few months. And they apparently go to the community to find at least one interesting person in the community to speak as part of their commencement every year. And they found me. And we're like, well, you've been a professional magician. You must have something interesting to say to our graduating high school seniors. It was incredibly kind of bizarre, but they really seemed excited about the idea of me speaking to their students and families. So I said yes. I felt very fancy saying yes to a commencement speech. I genuinely, actually, I'm being a little silly about it, but the truth is, John, at that time, when they asked me that, I had a moment where I thought, oh, I made it. I didn't realize I made it. Like, I actually, your head's down trying to just make enough money doing card tricks at restaurants and local corporate events and all this. I was trying to put my wife through her master's, and I was just so focused on trying, my then fiance, I was so focused on just trying to make it as a magician. I didn't really clock that I had been successful. And when somebody invites you to give a commencement speech, clearly you've been successful. And so it was actually this beautiful external validation I didn't realize I needed. And right at the same time, I got invited to speak at a local TEDx event being held at a high school, a different high school also. And so both of them were the same month. And so in June of 2015, I delivered a TEDx talk and a commencement speech. And when the TEDx talk hit YouTube, it went just mega viral. It went impossible viral. It went like one of the 100 most successful TED or TEDx talks of all time viral at that time, 2015. And the commencement speech, I was flooded with just parents and students coming up to me for an hour going, God, this was so helpful. It was so great to hear. What a beautiful thing you said. It made me think of this. And so those two things happened at the same time through nothing I tried to will into the universe. And I was like, oh, maybe there's something else I can do with my life. And so I started pursuing speaking.
I don't think anybody has the same journey into speaking as anyone else. There's so many different ways to go into it, but that's certainly a very nice way to come into it. And you're not the first magician to come. Well, do mentalists count as magicians?
Well,
Yeah.
they would be very offended for you to say that, but they absolutely are magicians.
Yeah, so we've had like Keith Kong on the show. He's a
Mhm.
pretty successful, well-known mentalist. People did love that episode. Seems to be a lot of parallels there as well that we got into on that conversation. For you, what do you now see as maybe being the parallels between speaking and your magic career previously?
That's a great question. The parallels between speaking and magic are far fewer than I originally expected when I made the transition. I quite expected it to be an easy transition. I thought, okay, I know how to entertain an audience for an hour. I can always do magic tricks or tell jokes or have interaction if I need to fall back on. I've got a crutch here. So I thought, well, I really just need to say something mildly interesting or useful, do some magic and tell some funny stories, some audience interaction, and it's going to go great. And it did not. As I started getting booked and I started getting paid very high professional fees immediately. I did not ramp up because I had a famous TED Talk. And so big, huge brands from across the world would reach out to me, like big names would reach out and say, come do that, but for an hour and on our stage. And they were paying $5, $6, $8, $10,000. Now, those are very normal professional speaker fees today. But one, as a magician, and two, in 2015, these were absurd amounts of money to me. I mean, it was just crazy. And I felt this tremendous pressure to over deliver, or even just to live up to, and forget over deliver, to live up to what they were paying me. I really felt like an imposter. And the truth is, I was an imposter. I didn't have content matter expertise. And they were treating me as if I was an expert on human connection, because it's what I talked about in my TEDx talk. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, I have 14 minutes and 12 seconds to say about that. And I said it in the talk you've already watched. And so I started doing these talks by basically just doing the 14 minutes worth of human connection content, but spreading it out over an hour by shoving lots of entertainment into it. And what happened is all of the charisma that I had did not make these successful speeches. I was making people laugh. They were loving the magic. They enjoyed the audience interaction. But at the end of these speeches, kind of a nothing burger. Nothing was really happening. The clients, it was fine. They were happy enough. But no one rebooked me. Nobody referred me. And after about a year and a half after the TED Talk, my speaking career dried up. The initial burst of inquiries were gone, and there's no momentum. And then I had nothing, and I actually had to build a speaking career from scratch. And so your question of what are the parallels, I kind of answered it in the negative, but I was expecting that speaking was about charisma and entertainment and captivating audiences. And actually, really great professional speaking is about content and not delivery in the performance sense, but it's about delivery of the message. Is there a clear message that the audience can understand, they can follow, and they know what to do with when you leave the room or when they leave the room? And that became the journey of my speaking career, learning how to do that.
It's interesting. And I think you might be one of the only guests I've ever invited onto my show who I knew that I might not completely agree with on things before I brought you on, but really wanted to have the conversation because I don't know, but it ultimately is going to depend on some of the things. So I would say that the entertainment element is still relevant in speaking, is just not the most important part of it. Like there still has to be some entertainment factor. And it sounds a bit like you're saying maybe there doesn't need to be that. Is that right? Or would that just be the extreme of to take to what you were saying?
So here's my position. If given the choice, choose design over delivery. In a perfect world, I would like to listen to an incredibly charismatic, engaging, entertaining performer deliver a masterfully built speech. It is rarely the choice that speakers have. You tend to have one of two things: somebody who comes from entertainment and has to find a message, or, like I did, or somebody who is an expert, an academic, a scientist, a researcher, an industry leader, someone who's an expert in their topic, but is now being asked or told to speak. And what happens is the experts who are being told you have to speak because there's going to be stakeholders in the room, there's going to be politicians who can fund our research. Those people turn down speaking opportunities because they think they're not entertaining enough. They don't think they have the charisma to carry the room. And they're wrong, sort of. They're not wrong that they're not charismatic. Most of them are incredibly dull, boring people who are just geniuses. They're wrong that they can't deliver a powerful, engaging, and important presentation that moves the needle on their work simply because they lack charisma. On the other hand, the people that come in like I did, that come in from entertainment, what I find is when audiences watch them, they enjoy it, they laugh, they quote unquote engage in the most superficial sense, and they leave the room. And I do this at every conference. I ask people after one of those people has spoken, hey, what did you take away from that? What was the big lesson? What was the learning? Most people within minutes of leaving one of those talks cannot give you an explicit answer. They say, oh, it was just so inspiring. It was so great. I just loved their energy. And like, pardon me, but so what? Like, if you're not producing action, if the audience isn't leaving knowing exactly what they should do, think, or rethink as a result of your talk and putting it into practice, what are we doing? Like, so that's how I feel about it.
Maybe we don't disagree too much then after all. I was I was just recently writing about a speaker I once saw. He was like, she'd been speaking a long time. She was great on stage. Presence was there. The drama was there in her presentation. She delivered fantastically. And the whole talk made not one lick of sense. Like, I couldn't connect the beginning to the end. And I was looking around thinking everyone else in the room is just nodding on, going, oh, yeah, really great talk. And there was just one or two other people who were looking a bit nonplussed. Like, what is she actually talking about? And to this day, I still have no idea what that talk was about. But I get what you're saying. It's like all style and no substance. This is something that even Marcus Aurelius talked about back in the day, of like the sophists, and how it was all performance and no substance to it. And he didn't like that.
Yes. And so that my mission is essentially for the people who have charisma, performance chops, whether they come from entertainment or not. Some people don't come from entertainment, but they just have that thing, whatever that is. It's teachable, sort of. You know, there's some natural element. There's quite a bit of teaching. Those people, what I want them to do is go, imagine the impact that you could make on the world if you paired that with a masterfully designed speech, right? Like, what if you designed a speech that actually made sense, that had a core message, that moved the audience to action? Imagine how much easier your career would be and how much better the impact you would make on the world would be. And on the other hand, my message to the experts, which are mostly our clients, we mostly serve properly credentialed experts who have to talk, not people who want to speak. And so my message to them is, you do not need to become a charismatic jump kicks, laughter, interaction performer to get your work into the hands of the people who need to hear it, right? Yeah. You can simply deliver the talk if you design your talk properly and simply do it. Yeah, it will work.
I think this is all something that took me way too long to realize in the speaking world. You know, I can remember being back at speaker trainings with Julian Treasure, who we did training together, and like in the competition within one of the trainings, I beat out Julian. I'm thinking, wow, I beat him out in the training, and I thought that he's massively more successful than me. But he had the content and I didn't have that. I had the performance skills. I had the charisma, but I didn't have the other stuff that was missing. I corrected that issue since then, but if you don't recognize that, you can end up in this position like I did of thinking, how come all these people are so successful when I know that I'm a better speaker?
Yes. And that is exactly the thesis of the book. It's not basically, it's not you. It's not the speaker. It's the speech, right? Especially when experts come up sometimes, and I've had people say this, they come up, and there was a financial advisor walked up to me after I had given my own keynote one time. And I speak on human connection. I have my own personal brand. I do corporate culture, healthcare, stuff like that. And I had given a talk, and he came up and he said, "Man, I wish I was as entertaining as you. I have to give talks on personal finance to try to get people to understand why they should care more about this and pay more attention to it." And he goes, finance is just so boring. And I just stared at him. I thought, first of all, you've made finance your life's work. Presumably, you don't think it's boring. It's like, well, no,
Right.
I find it fascinating. I'm like, okay, let's start there. There are no boring topics. There are no boring speakers. There are just boring speeches. Like, let's design great speeches. And also, I'll toss this back to you here. I have a thing when people use the word entertainment, like, I wish I was more entertaining. How do I become more entertaining? They think you need to be a comedian. You need to be funny. And that's one way to be entertaining. So is juggling. So is streaking naked on a baseball field. I've seen it happen. So, like, there's lots of entertaining things. So are cat videos, right?
Sure.
It doesn't mean that that's the substance. We award almost every Academy Award to dramas, not to comedies. So comedy is not the only way to be entertaining. Movies that are dramas are still entertaining. So what I always tell my speakers is engagement is entertainment. If you have engaged them fully, they will be entertained. They need not be laughing or falling out of their seats.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. There's so many different ways to do it, and everyone thinks you have to be this or the other. And I think it's maybe even been reinforced in the industry somewhat. There's standard jokes go around about, you need to be able to make your audience laugh if you want to get paid and stuff like that. It's like, well, yes, but maybe no as well. Let me ask you that. I mean, I'm sure you would have come across, if not read, Dan and Chip Heath's book, The Power of Moments.
I don't actually think I've read it, so give me the context that I would need.
Sure. So ultimately, that book is about creating these powerful moments. These, like you remember Bill Gates' TED talk where he released the mosquitoes, or there's the one, I forget the lady's full name, but the Dr. Jill something, where she brought out a live brain on the stage, creating those sorts of powerful moments within a presentation. Like, a lot of people say that's essential. Certainly that seems to be one of the things that they allude to in that book. But maybe from what you're saying, that isn't quite so important after all.
I wouldn't say that bringing out a prop essentially is what you just described is essential. It is one of the ways to support your point. In this new book I've got coming out, at the very end of it, I've got a chapter on like all the creative ways to support your points. Because of course you can support it with data. I have a whole chapter on data, but I introduced the chapter on data by saying essentially in today's world, data is not enough. It's necessary, but not sufficient, right? It's not, I had a line that was cut from the book actually. It's hard to remember after like 2 years worth of edits what's actually in there anymore. But there was a line that was definitely cut where I basically introduced the chapter on data saying, in a world where everything's made up and the facts don't matter, which was a reference to whose line is it anyway? The game where everything's made up and the points don't matter. Facts don't move people. They never really moved people, but they have an even smaller impact than they ever have. So you need to support your points creatively, and creating moments as you're describing. There's so many ways to do it. The most common way speakers do it is with storytelling, right? Storytelling is the thing, right? We were talking before we started recording about Francisco Mafuz. He's a renowned storytelling specialist. He works with me and my clients, which you did not know before you mentioned him, which was fun. So stories are real life examples that make a point. Stories can grab people. They can be funny. They can be moving. They can simply just paint a picture in someone's head. But I love having props. I encourage lots of our clients to use a physical prop on stage. And for most of them, it never even occurs to them. It only occurs to me because I came from magic. And there's something it's something that like it wakes the audience up when you introduce a prop. Especially, I have these moments where, so there's a TEDx talk we worked on a bunch of years ago, one of my favorite ones we ever worked on, from Peter Tellefstel. He's a Norwegian PR and communication specialist, but he was
I
doing
actually
a
know who
talk.
he is. Yeah.
You know Peter. Okay. So
Yeah, through Speaker Lab. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Beautiful. So Peter, we worked on his TED Talk, and I spent 2 years with him building the speaking career. If you've followed him, he's off doing incredible things. I worked with him on his first book and all these things. In Peter's TED Talk, which is on forgiveness, he wanted to do a talk not on granting forgiveness, which is what you always hear about, why it's useful to grant forgiveness. He wanted to talk about why you need to learn and practice the art of asking for forgiveness. It was a very different way of thinking about it, and it now has 2 million views or whatever. Now, in Peter's talk, he was explaining to me when we were working on it at one point that at the end of his forgiveness journey, basically, his father had 2 commissioned paintings done, like physical paintings framed, done for him, and showed him and said, here, this one, Peter, this one represents when you were, heading away from us. You were, you were moving in a different direction. We felt like we were losing you. But this painting represents when you found yourself, when you came home, and it was just very, very moving. And Peter said, do you think I should have, the photos of these paintings up on the screen during my talk? I said, probably yes. We have a no slides rule unless absolutely necessary. But for that, probably. I said to him, but wait, let me ask you a question. These paintings are obviously incredibly valuable to you. They're one of a kind. They're part of your story, your journey. How comfortable or not would you feel actually bringing them to the TEDx event? And he just went, no, I could bring them. And so I went, okay, here's what we're going to do. When you come out to do your TEDx talk, there will be on one side of you and on the other side of you 2 easels, each with a painting, but the audience won't know that because they'll have been covered completely top to bottom in a sleek black sheet. They will just sit there and you will not refer to them or gesture to them once the entire talk until you hit the conclusion. And at the moment where you talk about the first painting, you will take the sheet off of it and reveal it. And the second one, you will take the sheet off and reveal it. And he did this in the TED Talk. And that moment of physically revealing the paintings on stage worked so much better, so much more emotional, so much more engaging than simply clicking them onto a slide. So I am a fan of using audience interaction, live polls, physical props, but you don't need to do any one of these things. You just have to choose the right thing to support your point at every moment.
Right. Yeah, and I've got a client right now who's a professional saxophonist and moving into speaking. Yeah, really awesome. But one thing he's been very clear that he doesn't want to do is play the sax on his keynote talks. It's like he wants to get up and speak. It's like, absolutely, you do not have to do that. Just because you have that talent and ability doesn't mean you need to bring it into that. But there are people who definitely can. But I've also seen people who've brought in, like, one lady was a concert pianist. She spent probably about 10 minutes of her keynote playing piano, and it was kind of boring.
Okay. Well, so there you go, right? And so, but the question that what we're actually dancing around is not the question, should you play your saxophone or not? The question is there a moment in this talk where you would land the point better and more memorably by playing the saxophone? So that is how I think through the magic in my keynotes. When I'm on stage for an hour, there's probably about 8 total minutes of magic over the 60 minutes I'm on stage. And the reason that each of those tricks are in there is not for entertainment. I don't need it. I do talks. I have a bunch of talks I do with no magic. However, in my primary signature talk on human connection, I've been booked for the last 11 years since the TED Talk. There are moments that I use a magic trick, but the question for me is never, how can I shove a magic trick into this keynote? It's always, at this moment of my talk, what element can I pull from to make this point? Sometimes it's straight teaching. You're just teaching. Other times you're using a GIF or a video to support something. Other times I'm doing direct audience interaction, a live poll, a stand and share. Sometimes I have an easel I'm writing things down on physically on stage. And sometimes I choose a magic trick or a story. So I would say to your saxophonist, without knowing what his topic is or his content at all, missed opportunity for not doing it at all.
And look,
But
it's ultimately it's up to him that becomes relevant at some point. But I get what you're saying. It's like kind of transitioning from one career into another is like want to make that transition. Yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of principle as when you're deciding what stories to use in your talk. You have to decide what stories make the most sense and fit with what you're doing. But there's just this whole world of other tools that can help you deliver more effectively and make bigger impacts or emphasize something in a way that's going to make it more memorable or more relevant to the audience. So I definitely particularly appreciate that. It's giving me something to think about as well. When it comes to something like PowerPoint, though, I mean, okay, TED Talk, sure, you don't really want to have that. I know, although I have seen some that do. But what's your general take on those anyway? I mean, I know some people tend to rely on them, and I've always had advised clients, make your talk, if you want to use them, but make your talk so that you can deliver it without them. But where would you sit with that?
It's what you just said. I mean, our rule of thumb is this: if the talk doesn't work without your slides, the talk doesn't work. Right? That you should be able to stand up in a room that lost power. There's no microphone, there's no slides. You should be able to be as effective as a speaker with no supports. The mess, and that's why we prioritize design of the talk. The talk should work regardless of the external conditions. And then, if it works, slides are just another tool, like all those other ones we just talked about. They're most useful in talks that are, I would say, talks that are over 20 minutes long. If you're speaking for less than 20 minutes, generally we will say to you, no slides unless absolutely necessary. And even then, I'm going to try to convince you not to. Like that's usually my line. And the times that it's absolutely necessary is, for example, I have a scientist, Dr. Jacob Levinson. He's a marine biologist collaborating with NASA on the next generation of animal tracking technology. It's very complex. And so we're already doing a lot of work to help general audiences or politicians or science, interested individuals understand this work. But when he goes to explain a concept, it's almost impossible to really convey it to a non-marine scientist without putting up a simple diagram that just helps them orient themselves, like visually, when he's talking about time of arrival technology is the inverse of GPS. And it's like putting arrows on the screen that show you the opposite of GPS. It's just very useful for people. Over 20 minutes, slides become more useful. And once you're in the 40 plus, so you're doing like a paid professional keynote, it's almost impossible not to use them in 2026. I would have answered differently pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I had never used a slide once in a 1 hour speech in my entire career. I had never used slides at all. It was 100% me and the audience for 60, 70, 80 minutes. And I was always asked to do long keynotes, probably because I came from entertainment. So they figured I could do it. I never used slides. The virtual world and the pandemic and the rapid, AI and all the other things that we know about, they did noticeably change how people engage and how long they can engage with only one medium. So slides, I think for longer talks are necessary today. Not that there's certainly could do it without it, but I think for most people, slides are necessary. Also, the larger the group, I think this would sound weird to speakers, to people who are not professional speakers. The larger the audience, the more slides are necessary. Because if you have just 20 people in front of you in a boardroom, you can physically, with your energy, just being a human in close proximity, keep everyone's attention for an hour if you need to.
Yeah.
Once there's 1,000 or even like 200, the people towards the back just have more opportunities to get distracted simply because they're not up close to you. And so slides can just help them stay focused, or when they do get distracted, click back into the talk without losing it. So those are my thoughts around slides.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So for a show that's about professional speaking, it's weird that you're going to be the first guest I've ever asked this question to. But it does very much rely on the book that you've written that's coming out soon, the one-page keynote. Mm-hmm. How would you define a keynote? What's its purpose, and what actually is a keynote?
It's a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked. What is a keynote and what is its purpose? Yeah. it's funny that you said you've never asked that once before on a show about
Not
professional
once.
speaking.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had never heard anybody ask this question, which is why a few years ago I started running workshops on what is a keynote speech and what's the difference between it and other types of speeches. So the first thing that we should be very clear about is I define a keynote as at least 20 minutes long. Now, this will this will sound very, if you go read the book, you will think I'm contradicting myself here, because every example in the book is from a TED Talk we've worked on, which are all under 20 minutes. The reason the examples in the book are from TED Talks is, one, they're short enough that the reader of the book can go watch them in its entirety and understand the system I'm teaching them, right? Because they're only 10 or 12 minutes long. And two, they are public, they're available. Whereas most of the keynotes we've worked on with people, they are not fully available for the reader of a book to go watch. So the reason the TED Talks are the book as examples is not because they're actually keynotes. They're not. Now, a keynote speech is at least 20 minutes long, where the audience is fully focused on you. You are at the front of the room and you are there to teach, essentially. But more than teaching, you are there to change people's perspective on something. The number one goal of a keynote speech is to shift perspective. You will not create actual change. It's very unlikely that you can create actual change during a keynote speech. From the front of the room in 20 or 30 minutes, the likelihood you're going to create real change. Real change takes repetition and reinforcement. That's why we do workshops and consulting, all this stuff. The main goal of a keynote speech is to change how somebody thinks so that they can change what they do. People will not do something new if you don't change how they think. And so most keynotes fail just right away. They fail because they don't change people's thinking at all. Most keynotes, even really enjoyable ones, are merely interesting. But people don't walk away thinking that, or having a new set of beliefs, right? There's no actual paradigm shift for them in their world. So that's the first thing. But if you're a professional speaker, if you're being paid, because again, I work with a lot of people who are not paid. That's not why they're not professional speakers. They're experts who have to speak. If you are a paid professional speaker, which is most of your audience, right? If not all of your audience wants to be paid professional speakers. Do I have that right?
Yes, I hope
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, right. Well, right. Okay. So if the people listening are all trying to get paid to speak, the actual question you have to ask is not what does the audience need? It's what do the buyers need? And so I've asked every event planner for the last, 11 years, so thousands of event planners, I've asked them the same question, which is a version of what would success look like to you when my speech is done? Like, what are you actually looking for? How are you going to track the success? How will you know if we've done the job? And I'm telling you, 9 out of 10, if not 9.9 out of 10 of them all answer the exact same way. They say some version of, I will know your speech was successful if I hear people talking about it in the coffee breaks, at the dinner, in the Slack channel, at the Monday morning meeting. If I hear people talking about it, your speech was successful, which is why I use the phrase, the buzz is the business. The business of professional speaking is to get people talking about it, because if they're talking about it later, there's a higher chance they will actually do something with what you taught them. And if people don't know how to talk about what you do, they will not talk about what you do. And as we said earlier, most speakers, you get to the end, and no matter how entertaining they were, you have no idea how to describe what you just saw apart from fun, interesting, engaging. And so that's the purpose of a keynote speech. If you're a professional speaker, it's to create buzz after you've left the room.
It's a great definition. I just make me think what I always say to my clients who I work with, though. If your audience leaves the talk in the room, what was the point?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
So very,
Agree.
very, very much with you there. Okay. So with that, your focus with the book is very much on the content of the talk. What is the right way to go about creating a keynote, especially when, well, firstly, do you need to be an expert in something to create that? And if you are, where do you start?
Yeah. So do you need to be an expert to create that kind of a talk? It's a tough question. I will say all of the least successful talks we have helped people build are the clients that we no longer accept into working with us. I am now at a point where we turn down about 60 or 70% of everybody who comes into our discovery calls. We're very curated, and it's because every time I've ever worked with a motivational speaker, an inspirational speaker, or a speaker whose entire speech is essentially, I have a story that's either tragic and I've overcome it, or, I ran, 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents, and that's what I want to talk about. Anybody who's speaking because of either just pure life experience, a unlucky tragic story, or just they're just such a motivational person, people love having them on stage. We don't work with those people anymore. And it's not because they aren't capable of building great professional speaking careers. They absolutely are. They can get paid, make a living, do their thing. They don't create change, though. They just don't. People after those speeches do not do new things as a result. And that is why, and I heard you, and just in the previous episode you had, what was her name? Elliot, talking about that. I was so thrilled to hear Elliot talking about that, saying you have to demonstrate an ROI. It's not 1987 anymore, right? It's just, you have to demonstrate that there's a return on investment. If you are not actually an expert, and I don't mean you have a PhD, there are lots of ways to become an expert. I don't have a PhD. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy that I've never used, right? It was a tough phone call home to mom and dad. I'm going to abandon my PhD in philosophy to do card tricks for a living. So how did I become an expert in human connection? I don't have a PhD. I didn't go to grad school. I'm not an organizational psychologist. Well, there's a different way to become an expert, which is you've spent an unreasonable amount of time on an incredibly niche subject, more than anyone could possibly expect, right? Just by obsessing over that topic, reading everything I could read, talking to anyone I could talk to, listen to every podcast, interviewing people, over years of doing that over a topic that didn't even have a name when I started doing it. In 2015, human connection was not a category. I kind of became the expert people thought I was when they started booking me. But it was my effort to know more about that topic, to understand it at a level that nobody else seemed to, and from a different perspective than someone who is properly credentialed would have. They understand it from their academic perspective. I understand it from a lifetime of being a professional magician, right? So
Right.
I believe that you have to be an expert in some way in the topic that you speak about to create real change. Because if you are not, then you don't understand the nuance of what it takes someone to change their behavior as well enough to actually make that behavior change.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard
Very
to hear for
important.
people. It's not to say you shouldn't speak. Go speak. You don't have to be an expert to speak.
But I think it's really important for people to get that as well, because imposter syndrome kicks in even for people who have all the credentials. And it's like, well,
Mostly for people, more often for people who
yeah,
have the credentials. It's
the
the
people
inverse
who are
of the
least
Dunning-Kruger effect.
imposterish.
That's right. It's the inverse of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? The Dunning-Kruger
Yeah.
effect is you have to be pretty smart to know how dumb you are, right? And so that when you know very little, when I first started talking about human connection, I thought I was a genius. I knew a couple of things from having been a magician. And the further you get into it, you discover the nuance and the edge cases, and when good advice to most people would be bad advice to somebody else. For example, one time I gave a speech, went really well, everybody loved it, feedback forms are great, but one very shy person came up to me after the talk, waited for everyone else to be gone, came up and said, I really enjoyed the speech. I learned a lot. Thank you. However, you recommended at one point, you talked about eye contact for a while and how beneficial that is to human connection. And they said, that's clearly true. I know that, I've seen the data. They said, however, I'm on the spectrum. I am not capable of making eye contact, certainly not sustained eye contact. It's just not something I can do. It would be great if you mentioned that when you talked about eye contact. And I apologized to them, said thank you, and then kind of forgot about it. And then 2 months later, I was giving a talk. It went great. Somebody came up to me. It was like deja vu. Same exact conversation. Said the exact same thing to me. I'm on the spectrum. And I went, once is a fluke, twice is not. If two people summoned the courage to walk up to me after I just got a standing ovation on that stage and tell me something that made them feel a little uncomfortable, or they wished I had said something different or explored a different aspect of this, then there's probably dozens over the years that have felt like that and never came up to me, maybe hundreds. So I modified that. First, I went and looked at the research, talked to people who are on the spectrum. My wife is a therapist, so I'm able to use her a lot to like help me understand some of that world that I don't know about. And then after that, my speeches, when I get to eye contact, there's an asterisk on the slide next to the word. And I say eye contact, and I go, now, just everybody see the asterisk next to that? I'm coming back to that. Don't forget about it. And I talk about eye contact, and then I come back to, I go, that asterisk, if you're someone who is either on the spectrum or neurodivergent or doesn't feel comfortable making eye contact or sustained eye contact, then instead of E standing for eye contact, I clicked it and it changes it to engage. It goes, engage. Just think, stay engaged, right? And that's more about your energy than it is about your eyes. And people started coming up to me in droves after speeches going, nobody has ever recognized us. Nobody has ever made that caveat. And that's what being an expert actually is. It's knowing the edge cases. It's understanding the nuance and making sure that while you do deliver like assertively so that people can take your advice and do something with it, that you also recognize when that advice would not be right for someone else and what they should do about it.
Yeah. A great point, and great that you evolved and delivered something that actually increased the audience's ability to be involved in that as well, and to feel seen. I think one thing that, well, I think just one thing to say for our listener, particularly, is like you undoubtedly have the credentials here as well. I've seen that you've recently won like several Cicero awards for speech writing, and so this isn't just sort of like, oh, I'm telling you how to do this. It's like, no, you're out there showing people how it's done as well, and being recognized for that, which is great. And the book's coming up pretty soon as well. Now, I'm not going to ask you to condense that whole book into a couple of minutes. I'm sure that's not possible anyway, but where, as a starting point for people who are looking to get paid for their keynote speaking, where should they really begin in your estimation in creating a keynote?
Yeah, where should people begin? So, I mean, the first place that people should begin is if you're at the stage where you're dreaming of being a speaker. So you're not someone who's already an expert on the topic or has been asked to speak. If you're just like I would love to do that, then the first thing you have to do is step way back from this conversation we've been having, because we're in the weeds of we're multiple levels in. What you need to do is step a few levels back and go, okay, one, which topics do I feel qualified to talk about? And you don't have to have a PhD, but you do need to be qualified. It shouldn't be merely anecdotal. Like if you just, like some people are like, I feel like if more people were nice to each other, like the workplace would be better. I'm like, that's probably true. Can you back that up? And it's like, if you can only point to like famous books that have already come out, the likelihood you're going to break into the speaking market is very low, because there's already famous people talking about that with the research and the data. You need to have something to bring forward, but you start to go, what am I actually qualified to talk about? So that's your topic. And then you're looking for essentially your differentiator, or you could say your perspective on it. So you go, this is the topic. Now, what's the perspective that I'm going to bring that would make it feel different from the most famous person in this field? Because to be honest, I get booked at the same kinds of events that can also afford to book Brene Brown. I'm not saying I get booked over her. I'm saying I get booked by the same kind of clients that could have hired her.
Yeah.
She's clearly more qualified than me in many ways to talk about, say, human connection. Why am I getting booked? It's not that I'm competing with her. I'm not competing with her at all. It would never occur to people to debate between her and me, because I'm coming to human connection from the perspective of what I learned as a magician. she can't compete with me. I don't compete with her. We're just two different people talking about the same topic. So you have your topic, and then what's your unique angle on it? So you're looking for a topic and an angle. That's the first thing. Start there, but then, and I've heard you talk about this with folks plenty of times, John, so this is going to be a little bit of repetition, but it's probably useful for listeners. You then must identify the problem that you solve, that not the audience, that the buyer is aware of and is trying to solve. It doesn't matter if the audience has this problem, if the buyer doesn't think it's a problem, or if the buyer isn't trying to solve it. The person writing the check or inviting people to speak, they have to be aware of the problem and they have to care about solving it. There's lots of problems that people have that no one has any interest in actually solving. Like, that's a huge mistake I see. They're like, well, this is a problem. I'm like, yes, but the person who writes the checks doesn't care about it. They're perfectly happy leaving that problem alone. Like, it's, this will make that more concrete. When I first started selling human connection as a speaker, it was very hard because in 2015, 2016, 2017, CEOs didn't give a crap about connection in the workplace. I was pushing a boulder up a hill like Sisyphus, man. Nobody cared. You know, when they started booking me, when I started talking about attract and retain top talent, generate sustainable repeat business, eliminate costly turnover. When I started talking about the problems I actually have, and then human connection was merely my way to get them to that, and I have a take on that from being a magician, that's where my speaking career took off.
Yeah. Man, there's so many other questions that could lead me into. I think we might just have to try and get you back onto the show again in the future. But lots of really good stuff here, and it's been a very enjoyable conversation. And I do think that onto that point, I think people who listen to the show regularly will have heard recently, and will hear upcoming episodes as well, about how the information speaking age is done. It's like, if you are an information speaker, that's kind of over. And well, not kind of over, it is over. So when I see people who are still trying to make their speaking case in that sort of way, is like, you're like just trying to push a double-decker bus up a hill. It's you're not going to get very far. It's probably going to run you over. So very, very important stuff that you say there. And I can't wait to get my hands on the book when it does come out. Tell us a bit more about that. Tell about when the book's available and how best for people to find out more about that.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is a great conversation. So the book is called The One-Page Keynote, How to Design a Speech That Works Every Time, No Charisma Required. That is the title of the book. And the core thesis, as we discussed, is design beats delivery every time. If you have to choose design. And this book teaches you from start to finish exactly how to design an entire keynote speech from a blank page. And once you understand the system, the entire talk, whether it's 20 minutes or 60 minutes, can fit on a single typed printed piece of paper if you needed an outline. Most people don't do that, but you absolutely can. You can do it. You can put the whole 60-minute thing there, and you'd be able to walk up and deliver that talk with no other notes if you had to. The reason for this book is primarily that I have shelves of books. I'm sure you do as well on speaking. Lots of excellent ones, many more terrible ones. Even the excellent ones don't do this. In other words, there are many excellent books on the business of speaking, on storytelling, on performance, on presence, on slides, there's so many books on those topics, on how to be funny in speeches. You cannot find a book that teaches you how to build an entire keynote speech from scratch. Go to all the books on your shelf and you will find that at best they're given a single, in other words, the writing of the speech is given a single chapter in an entire book on speaking. And I just think to myself every time I see that, if you're on stage for 30 minutes and you talk at the average 150 words a minute, you will say 4,500 words while you were on stage in 30 minutes. And you're telling me that in this entire 400-page book on speaking, there's only been 15 pages dedicated to the words you're going to say while you're on stage? This is crazy. So I wrote the book to solve that problem.
Well, it's much anticipated. And for our listener who'd maybe like to just find out more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Right. So best way actually right now, the book's coming out May 27th, just in a few weeks from the time we're recording this. If you go to keynotedesignbook.com, keynotedesignbook.com, you can just jump on the wait list. And I'm just hoping that it will be $1 on launch day, the digital copy. If you can buy it on launch day, if you're interested, there's your $1 version. Everybody who buys it on launch day will actually also get access to a full free half-day virtual intensive on how to build your keynote speech that I will personally be leading if you buy it on launch day. And
that sounds amazing.
You can find me by just looking up Brian Miller speaker, Brian Miller consultant, Brian Miller connection, Brian Miller magician, anywhere on the internet.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to say I am on that wait list, and I'm very much looking forward to getting my hands on that as well. Brian, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad you agreed to come on the show, and I look forward to having another conversation with you at some point in the future, because I know there's much more we could go into. But to wrap this up for today, thank you for coming on the Professional Speaking Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I don't know about you, but I'm almost a little disappointed that Brian and I didn't have a bit more disagreement about the importance of delivery and charisma, stage presence in terms of keynotes. So I mostly agree that if you have to make the choice between design and delivery, if that's a real choice for you, design matters more than delivery if you don't have any of those other skills to bring to the table. Where I might differ somewhat really is that it shouldn't ever really be the case that your keynote could be delivered by anyone. I think there has to be an essence of you in there for it to be the kind of keynote that can connect with people. I have bought and read Brian's book since this episode was recorded, and I have to say there's lots of great stuff in there. It is absolutely worth getting yourself a copy of that. Sadly, the sale price is no longer available, so it is now available at full price, but I think it's highly worthwhile and completely recommend getting yourself a copy. I do plan to do an episode review of Brian's book as well, to go into some more of my thoughts about it, and perhaps some of the areas where we do differ in our thinking on this, as well as what I found particularly valuable and helpful from the book. Now, I would say that if you are planning to do 20, 30-minute talks as part of your offering, then that is a great structure for you to implement and use, and follow some of those TEDx guidance elements that work so well and have won Brian and his speakers several Cicero Awards just this year. So my plan for the next episode is to dive a little more into what a keynote is, what keynote speaking really is all about, and whether keynote speaking is the right career for you, and what elements of that you might want to look at. I want for you to be able to know, if you're just coming into this or considering speaking as a business or career for yourself, what you would actually be getting into. And if you hadn't previously thought that this could be an actual career and business for you, then definitely you and I should have a chat. You can get in touch with me from all the details in the show notes, as well as finding all of Brian's information and the link to buy the book there. And I hope that you will come and join me next time. Do keep an eye on some of my social media stuff right now. I'm putting out a lot of content around speaking and growing speaker businesses that you won't want to miss. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. In the meantime, go and do something worth speaking about.